Welcome to Fr.TAD Talks, where we learn together and rediscover the heritage of the Armenian people through our faith and culture. It's been a while since we released the first episode of Fr.TAD Talks on Armenian khachkars, crowstones, which I hope you enjoyed watching. And I know that I took a long break, but I'm back, and it's good to be back with the second episode of Fr.TAD Talks. As you know, we all are going through some difficult and challenging times, and we are encouraged to stay at home due to health issues and concerns. But I thought to use this opportunity and record some more of Fr.TAD Talk videos, because I have some great material that I've been presenting at our church, and I want to share this material with all of you. So thank you for being patient, and thank you for following our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel. And let's do the second episode of Fr.TAD Talks. Today's subject is very interesting to many, Armenians and to non-Armenians for that matter. This topic comes up in conversations very often when somebody, after learning that you're Armenian and you go to Armenian Church, may ask you the following question. Hey, what's the difference between Armenian Church and Catholic Church, or Greek Orthodox Church, or Protestant Church? And you can tell that this question is coming the minute you say you're Armenian and you go to Armenian Church. And sometimes you have to correct them after they confuse you with Romanian, and then you have to answer this question. Sometimes we struggle to give a clear answer. Very often, I hope, we do have an answer that is true. Or we have an answer that may not be correct, since we don't know ourselves either. And that's okay. This is why we are doing this episode today, to learn together. We are going to explore today the differences and similarities between Armenian Church and other Orthodox churches, as well as Catholic Church. And this is where I usually start the conversation. How exactly are we different from each other? And are we really that different from each other? And are these differences visible in our ecumenical or community interaction with each other? Let me ask you a question. What do you see on this paper? Most of us probably will see black dots on it. And that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make. When it comes to differences between Armenian and other traditional churches, particularly Orthodox and Catholic, there are only few differences, few dots in other words, because 90 and 95% we are similar and we are the same. In order to understand these differences, we need to go back to the beginning. Well, not that far, to the beginning of Christianity and to the times of the apostles. Let's quickly go through the first 300 years of Christendom. The apostles spread the gospel to the known world of the time, and among the countries they visited evangelized was Armenia. And not surprisingly, we had two apostles coming to Armenia, because we Armenians, we are used to having two of everything. So Christian communities were formed in almost every state of that time. Bishops were ordained and churches were built. Of course, we all know the story of St. Gregory the Illuminator, the bishop and first Catholicos of Armenia, who led the conversion of Armenia, and Armenia became the first country to officially accept Christianity as a state religion. Pretty soon, other nations, countries joined and became Christian. However, it is important to know that there was only one united Christian church at that time. The churches in other countries were not separate denominations, but rather the extension of the main Christian church. So the church in Armenia was not called Armenian Church, but Church of Armenia. Similarly, the Catholic Church, as it is known and referred to today, was called Church of Rome or Church of Egypt. You get the point. But this is important for all of us to know and understand. Since we are talking about the titles of churches, let's also clarify one thing about the Armenian Church. Today, very often, the Armenian Church is called Armenian Apostolic Church. It seems there is a special emphasis on the apostolic nature of the Armenian Church, which refers to something known as apostolic succession, meaning that the apostles founded this church, that the authority of this church comes from the apostles, and consequently from Christ. But there is also another reason which led to this emphasis in the title of the Armenian Church. And it has to do with the Russian Empire and Russian Orthodox Church. You may have heard that the Armenian Church sometimes is called Gregorian Church, referring to Saint Gregory the Illuminator as the founder of the Armenian Church. The name was specifically in common use among Russian Orthodox Church circles. At first you may think, well, what's wrong with this name? Wasn't Saint Gregory the first Catholicos? Sure, but the underlying notion was to deny the apostolic succession of the Armenian Church. The very fact that 300 years before Saint Gregory, the apostles preached in Armenia and founded the Armenian Church. And that's exactly how this emphasis came about, to fight against this false notion and safeguard the true apostolic nature and succession and authority of the Armenian Church. So let's make one thing clear for all of us to know. The official title of the Armenian Church is not Armenian Apostolic Church, but Armenian Apostolic Orthodox Catholic Church. Wow, you may think that's too much. And yes, it is. But it's also the same theological title for all the traditional churches, Greek Orthodox, Catholics, and others. We all are Apostolic, Catholic, and Orthodox. Now, when that's clear, let's move on to some specific details. As I mentioned above, we have more in common with each other than we have differences. All three churches, Armenian Church, other Orthodox and Catholic churches, share the same roots. And at some point, we were united. We were one church. See, we have the same structure. We have the same hierarchy. Generally, the same theology. Liturgy mostly is the same, with some liturgical differences. We all believe that communion is the real body and blood of Christ. We share the Nicene Creed with some minor modifications. We share the same major feasts and saints, 7 sacraments. The list goes on and on. Think about all of these similarities. So much in common. Now, when you think of differences, on the other hand, the list is much smaller. So what happened? What went wrong? That the church split and have been separated for more than 1,500 years. It happened here at a small town called Chalcedon at the Fourth Ecumenical Council in 451 AD. Ecumenical councils were these large gatherings of bishops from all around the church that would come together to resolve some theological controversies of the time. By the way, the first one was Nicaea, and it was attended by an Armenian bishop, Saint Gregory's son, on behalf of the Armenian Church. Now, there was a bishop at this time called Nestorius, Bishop of Constantinople. He was saying that Christ has 2 natures in him that are distinctly separate from each other. The bishops gathered the Third Ecumenical Council in Constantinople to address this controversy. They didn't like his formulation and they exiled him, as it happened often in the past. But keep this bishop in mind, because he is going to resurface later in our story. A few decades later, the Fourth Ecumenical Council is summoned, this time, as I mentioned, in Chalcedon. The year was 451. The issue again was the natures of Christ. Here, I'll put up a diagram to help you see 2 different thoughts on this. And I'm going to use a simple language to make this easier for you to understand. One school of thought was Alexandria, with Cyril of Alexandria as their leader. And he proclaimed that Christ has one nature that includes both humanity and divinity. They are not mixed or separate, but rather united and distinct. While the other side, led by Pope Leo of Rome, was saying that Christ has two natures that come together in one person. You may say, well, it sounds like the same thing, different terminology. And you are not totally wrong. Different terminology, but the essence and overall content is very similar. It is important also to note that Cyril was using person and nature terms interchangeably as synonyms to convey the same idea. This difference of opinions approach, or I should say terminology, created the first division, or as we call it, the first schism in the church. Now, what about Armenians, you may ask? Well, you may remember the year that Chalcedon happened was 451. And if you're Armenian, you know this date very well, because we were kind of busy that year, fighting against Persians for our identity and for our faith. Saint Vartan and his companions died in the Battle of Avarite, protecting our homeland. So we didn't have time to get involved in this controversy at the time. We officially addressed this controversy only about 50 years later, in 506 AD, in a town called Devin. But why 50 years later? Well, Chalcedon was not accepted easily in the church. It was reversed at some point by another emperor. There were always issues around this council. However, Armenians were forced to address this issue. Remember, I told you to keep in mind Nestorius and to remember this bishop. Last, we recall him being exiled, right? Now, where he was exiled to? No, not to Armenia, but very close to bordering Persia. His followers very often would come to Armenia and preach in Armenia and preach about two natures of Christ, claiming that the two-nature formulation of Chalcedon is their terminology and the same with their theology, which of course was not true. There shouldn't be any association between these two. The Armenian Church had to resist against the spread of this heresy and was forced to take a stand. And that's when the Council of Devin was called. 20 bishops and 20 lay people attended the meeting. The council first rejects the theology of Nestorius and Nestorians, and also the council rejects the theology of Chalcedon, due partly to the association with Nestorians and their false claims. The bishops and the lay participants of the Armenian Church affirmed the one-nature theology of Cyril of Alexandria. So the Fourth Ecumenical Council of Chalcedon and events following the council result in a first split and separation of the church. The division creates two families of churches that exist and remain separated until today. Here they are. They both are Orthodox and Apostolic churches with the same roots. They just happen to have a disagreement on nature or natures of Christ. Today, one family of churches is called Eastern Orthodox churches that include the Greek Orthodox Church, Russian, Serbian, Romanian, even Orthodox Church of America, Bulgarian, Georgian, and many others. The second family of churches is called Oriental Orthodox churches. That includes the Armenian Church, Coptic, Syriac, Ethiopian, Indian Orthodox churches. So to summarize this chapter, the main theological difference between Armenian Church and, let's say, Greek Orthodox Church and other Orthodox churches, as well as the Catholic Church, since the Catholic Church and Orthodox churches at the time were united and they were together. The only disagreement between these two is how we understand Christ. More specifically, how his humanity and divinity come together. We call it one nature, they call it one person, but they both agree on the essentials. Everything else that you may know or consider a difference are not really separating or dividing differences. They might be liturgical differences, how we celebrate the liturgy, our vestments, church architecture, icons, etc. Those are all various interpretations or introductions of Christianity within our ethnic and cultural framework. Now, when it comes to the Catholic Church, besides the difference on natures of Christ, there is also another significant difference that is important to note, and it is about the Pope. Particularly, it relates to the authority of the Pope. In the Catholic Church, they believe that the Pope has supreme authority. It is called supremacy of the Pope. The idea that the Pope, as a descendant of St. Peter, should be recognized by the rest of the Church as having jurisdictional authority over other churches. While the Orthodox Church, and among them the Armenian Church, believes that although Pope enjoys primacy coming from St. Peter, but that primacy is not supreme authority, and it is manifested in respect and not in power over the others. The Pope is recognized as the first among equals. Orthodox Church believes that the important theological decisions in the Church should be made by the Council of Bishops, called Synod. Believe it or not, because of these two main theological differences, our churches have been separated for more than 1,500 years. That's a long time. There have been some attempts to reunite, especially in the light of the ecumenical movement in the last century. Commissions and committees have been formed to discuss these issues and come to an agreement to reconcile our differences, but no tangible and considerable progress was made. The alienation for many centuries and sometimes the animosity towards each other makes the reconciliation a bit more difficult. As I said in the beginning of this episode, we are mostly the same. Besides these two differences, the rest is the same. In reality, we are not that different, theologically, liturgically, and even culturally. After all, we all like good food. We are one family that grew apart, unfortunately. The reunification is always a possibility. Furthermore, we have something greater in common. Our Lord that unites us, that brings us together as His children. So now, when somebody asks you the question, hey, what's the difference between Armenian Church and Greek Orthodox or Catholic churches? Now you know the answer. Now you know how to respond. But also, don't forget to add the part about how similar we are. Thank you for listening to Fr.TAD Talks. Let me know what you think, your suggestions or corrections you may have. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our Facebook page, and share with your friends. See you next time.